Welcome to the Happiness Podcast. I'm Dr. Robert Puff. Do you ever wonder why people do silly, crazy, what seem like really just awful things? Mind you, sometimes they do just seem silly, but at other times they really do seem atrocious. And some of these actions we may notice from ourselves, from our friends, or people that we've known for our entire life. And it's like, why do they do that? They know it's not the right thing to do, and yet they do these things that seem, at best, silly, and at other times just downright sad or even evil. I mean, after all, don't most of us, if not all of us, want to have happy lives? That's probably why we started listening to this podcast. We want to figure out how to have happy lives. And yet we know people, and we ourselves may be experiencing, that we do things that aren't leading us down the path of happiness. So in today's talk, I want to explore why we do things that are silly, or why do we do things that seem so beautiful and wonderful and truly praiseworthy in our lives? What happens? What's going on here? Well, the truth is we all have this, to some lesser degrees and to some a lot more degrees, but we have this inner voice that is all day long making comments about our behavior and the behavior of others. For example, let's say we're a student and tomorrow we have a test to do, but some friends come over and say, hey, you want to go out and join us for the evening? And we go out with them. So we don't study, and then we sit down and we take the test the next day, and we don't do very well. Well, when we get the grade back the following day, then that inner commentary begins. And the truth is, that inner commentary may have began when we went out with our friends instead of studied and kept going all the way until we got that final grade. But there is an inner commentary going on. And the question is it a critic or is it a cheerleader? Because it's going to be one of the two. And whichever it is, it's definitely going to impact us for making decisions in the future and the choices that we make. And it's going to impact the way we feel about what we've been doing in our lives right now, too. So it impacts our future, but it also impacts our current level of happiness or not happiness in our lives right now. So in this example of our test that we didn't study for, the inner critic, of course, would be very critical. And it may address us in a variety of ways. It may be softer and say, well, that wasn't the best choice. Why did you go out with your friends? See, now you failed and didn't do well on your test. I'm not very impressed. Or it may be a lot more harsh and say, you're an idiot. You're going to fail. You're going to do nothing with your life, and your life's going to turn out awful, and it's just going to suck because you make bad choices, and you're just an idiot. Pretty much simply that. This is the range at which the critic takes. It just attacks us for the choices that we make. There is a part of the critic that thinks, well, if I say enough critical things to this idiot, they may then in the future change their behavior. But what the inner voice of the critic doesn't realize is that it doesn't do that. It tends to make us keep doing things that aren't healthy for us in counterproductive behavior that leads us down a path where the critic can keep being critical of us. People that tend to have an inner critic, it just gets stronger with time because it has more now fodder to use against a person, and it just annihilates them. So people that often aren't doing well in life, and you can tell that they're not very happy with themselves, have an inner critic that is loud and extremely attacking, and they hear this inner critic throughout the day. Now, the inner cheerleader takes a very different path. It's going to look at behavior and say, okay, well, that wasn't the best choice, but I know we've been working hard all semester, and we did need a break, and it is only one test, and we'll do better next time. We'll learn from it. And perhaps we can even reach out to the professor and see if we can do some extra credit so that we can get that grade up. See the difference? The cheerleader is encouraging us to do better, to make good choices. And when we make good choices, it really points them out. Say, good job, you did well there. Where the inner critic would definitely find our faults, like when we look in the mirror and we feel like we're too heavy, would say, you're fat, you're disgusting. Where the inner cheerleader would say, hey, I know we need to lose a little bit of weight, but we can work on that. We can start going to the gym more often. We can eat a little bit better. We can drink more water throughout the day. The cheerleader encourages us. The critic just attacks us. And we all have that inner voice. But the question we want to ask ourselves Is my inner voice a critic or a cheerleader? Because the results of each of these two is very different. The inner critic is going to point out our faults, remind us throughout the day of our mistakes, and just pretty much attack us over and over again for the things that we don't do right. And of course, that does not build up our self-esteem, that does not make us feel good, and it doesn't even help us get better, because when we criticize someone, they focus on that. They don't focus on, oh, I can do better. They focus on, what's wrong with me? When we have an inner cheerleader, the results are very different. There's encouragement, they're saying we can do better, and they're there to help us to improve. They're just there to encourage us, and that encouragement helps us to get better in our life. Imagine if we had two friends. One friend, every time we saw them, pointed out every flaw that we had and commented on it, and another friend pointed out every good trait that we had and encouraged us. And who of these two friends do we want to hang out with? Of course, the cheerleader friend. It's like that. We're going to do better when we hang out with our inner cheerleader than our inner critic. So let's spend the rest of this talk talking about how do we pay more attention to and develop our inner cheerleader and stop spending time with our inner critic. Because for most of us, the inner critic wins out. And I think that's why a lot of people in life suffer and aren't very happy in life, even if externally things seem to be going well. Because the truth is, it actually doesn't matter what's happening externally. I mean, we all know people whose lives seem to be going perfectly, and we'd give anything to be who they are, who end up going to rehab, or end up committing suicide, or end up getting really angry in life and having a very challenging life, even though they have everything. Just pick up People magazine. It will prove what I'm saying. Externals don't matter. What matters is our inner critic or our inner cheerleader. And we want to have a lot more of our inner cheerleader speaking to us throughout the day. So how do we do this? Well, the first and probably most important thing is we need to begin to observe. Who is the strong voice inside of us? Is our inner critic winning out, or is the inner cheerleader winning out throughout the day? And we observe this on two fronts. Not only how is the inner critic or inner cheerleader talking to us, but how is the inner cheerleader or inner critic commenting on other people's behavior? Because how we treat others is how we're going to treat ourselves. If someone walks by and we see something about them that we don't like, let's say we think they're heavy, and we say, oh, they're fat, they're disgusting. Then when we look at ourselves later, for our flaws, for our imperfections, it may not be weight, but it may be we're too short, we're too tall, we're not successful enough, we're not pretty enough. Whatever it may be, that inner critic that critiques others will critique us too. So once we discover which voice is winning out, then we say, okay, if Dr. Puff is right and the inner critic is not going to be the path of happiness, then when I hear that inner critic, I need to change it. Let's say I see someone and I don't like something about them, perhaps the way they cut their hair. And instead of critiquing their haircut, I would reframe that and say, okay, what can I look at and see in them that I like? Well, I like the way they walk, or I love their voice, or I bet they're a really cool person. We just find other things to focus on. We let the cheerleader win out and start cheering them on, thinking of things that we can say about them that are good. And then with time, because we realize we do that to ourselves, when we walk by a mirror or compare ourselves to someone else, instead of critiquing ourselves, we say, okay, well, what are things about me that I do like? And we let that inner voice say those things. I really like the way that I'm kind to people. I really like the way that I've gone to college. I really like it that I have straight teeth. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it begins to focus on cheering us on. And even if we need to work on things, we say, I really like it that I'm listening to this talk today with Dr. Puff and learning how to improve our lives, because a cheerleader really helps us improve. Now, the inner critic would say, well, you should know how to do that already. But we really are created by our past and all our conditioning. And focusing in on what we're doing wrong with the inner critic is going to keep us stuck. But instead, If we cheer ourselves on for making good choices, like if we've never exercised much in the last couple of years and now we say, I'm going to start exercising, the inner critic would say, you fat slob, you're not going to exercise, you're a lazy bum. The inner cheerleader would say, I'm so proud of you for getting up and going for that walk right now. That's great, good job. It's what we focus on, and we have to, again, be aware of that the most important thing is we have to be aware of what we're doing. Are we mostly listening to an inner critic, or are we mostly hearing the inner cheerleader? And if it is the inner critic that's winning out, then we need to work towards, when we hear the inner critic, forcibly changing it to focusing in on the inner cheerleader and focusing in on things about us that we like and that we're proud of. Now, I know some of the listeners are going to say, well, Dr. Puff, there's nothing that's good about me. Well, that's just BS. I mean, I often use the example, even Hitler was a great speaker, he was a good artist, he was a good writer, and he had a girlfriend. Everyone has some positive traits. Everyone does. And we focus on those. And then even if we don't have much, then we say, well, but I am trying to get better. I'm working on this. And that's what it's all about. If you don't know how to play the piano and you start playing, you're going to be terrible. And if the inner critic wins out, it's going to say, you're terrible. Why even try? But an inner cheerleader would say, you've never done this before. This is new. So be patient and keep working on it. I'm so proud of you. It's like that with life. The tricky part is the inner critic says, but you should know how to do this. But the inner cheerleader would say, well, how are you supposed to know how to do this? This is what you were taught. This is what your parents taught you. This was your upbringing. These were the experiences you had. If you want to change it, it's going to take effort. It's going to take time. You need to be patient, and I'm going to cheer you on as you keep getting better. That's the difference. Our inner cheerleader really helps us to improve. Our inner critic keeps us stuck, and with time, our lives will get worse. But like I said, we have to know which voice is winning out. But once we know that, then we actively, once we notice, every time we notice, we actively work towards changing from the inner critic to the inner cheerleader. It takes practice, it takes time, but with time, we can get really good at this. And so our lives then will get a lot better and keep getting better as the inner cheerleader keeps winning out. I know this may be hard for some people. I get that. But if we work on it and if we commit to it, and if we keep learning the skills of how to have a good life, and now with over 330 episodes, there's a lot of things we can learn. We truly can have beautiful lives. It is work. It is effort. But with our inner cheerleader cheering us on, we can all truly have beautiful lives. Thank you for joining me on the Happiness Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, please go to happinesspodcast.org. And until next time, accept what is, love what is.